you can do that. All right, thesis statements. Let's talk about this. I know this is probably just review, but it's always good to have some review. So I like, as many other English teachers as well, I really like a really thorough thesis statement, something that's not just kind of broad or vague. And so I want to give you some steps to creating a good thesis. First of all, the first thing you want to do is, if you're not sure what to say, get your simple ideas on paper. Maybe there's some sort of main idea about Truman Capote that you just want to put down. Maybe it's a single word or a single phrase. Put that down, and then take that and start kind of elaborating on it. And this is one method. I'm going to give you two methods to do here. So here's a big topic: the South. Pretty big, right? The American South would probably be at least a little more helpful. Now we're talking the rivers and shores of the South. There's a better topic. So you want to keep narrowing and narrowing the topic. And you want to start elaborating on your argument. So how do you do that? These three questions are your magic key. If there's anything you learned today about thesis statements that you can apply to any thesis statement, history class, English, whatever, it's these three questions. Write down your thesis and ask yourself, see if you can take a phrase and ask yourself, how so? Or what about it? Why is it that way, right? You know, Truman Capote thinks that everyone in the story is equal or innocent. How so? What about it? Right? So you keep kind of expanding in that way. Here's an example. Don't state something we already know, like Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn is a great American novel. That's, it's a little too vague, and again, how so? Better, in Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain develops a contrast between life on the river and life on the shore. There we go, that's nice, better. But you could even say, what about life on the river and the shore, right? What's being contrasted? I think where a lot of students usually get caught up, they think, this looks good, they think that they're done. But you want to keep looking for those phrases or those clauses like the river and life on the shore that you can expand on. Picture like a reader kind of over your shoulder asking questions about your thesis. Even that's a little creepy. All right. Warmer, through its contrasting river and shore scenes, between public suggests that one must leave civilized society and go back to nature. Now that sounds great. But still ask why must they leave society, right? There's so many questions. And here is our A thesis. Through its contrasting river and shore scenes, 20 suggests that to find the true expression of American democratic ideals, one must leave civilized society and go back to nature. Yes. Exactly what you're going to. It's written well. It's all those things, right? For the outline, just a thesis. We're going to talk on Friday how to put this in your introduction. This will be the last sentence in your introduction, at least for my class. I know other teachers like the thesis, all sorts of places. All right, so this is one method of coming up with your thesis. I'll give you one other really cool trick that you can use in any class. There's basically 4 elements to every thesis. And you probably do this without even knowing it. There's the method that the author is using with some sort of active verb to create some sort of effect. So, and again, I'll post this video on YouTube if you're, not playing. So here's that same example thesis. So with that in mind. So through its contrasting river and shore scenes. So now we know that this is not just some random thing. This is Mark Twain is using this as a sort of tool. These contrasting river and shore scenes with a tool. You want to think about literature in that way. That authors, especially fiction or creative nonfiction, are using things as tools to tell their story, to communicate a message. And you always want an active verb, right? No passive verbs. And the red is what it's really all about, right? You know, what's the effect? What's the message? Truman Capote uses certain things like dialogue and symbolism and all these elements to suggest certain things about characters, right? Another, as for active verbs, another thing to consider that help you get around that. This is what you don't want to do, right? The at significant moments in his journey, Holden is an irresponsible child. Well, it doesn't have any action. Right? It doesn't feel alive. Much better, he chooses to resist entry into the adult world of loss of responsibility. A little more depth already. That's pretty much it. I think that's. Oh, the final thought on this. I don't know about you, I personally like to revise my thesis at the end of an essay, or how many of you have written an essay and realized your thesis doesn't exactly fit? That is perfectly fine. Everyone goes through that. What's a good technique that even professional writers use is, you don't need a perfect thesis at the beginning of writing an essay. You can have what's called a working thesis. So if you begin with a working thesis or a provisional thesis, and then do a good careful close reading, you will often find a version of your final thesis in your last paragraph. So the conclusion. Sometimes when you write your conclusion, it really helps you figure out the thesis. So what I want you to do for this outline is as best you can, but know that you can always go back. Okay? Any questions?